This video will cover how to create building projects in EC3. First, go to the Plan and Compare Buildings in the left side menu. It will open up in My Buildings by default, and this is where you can start creating your projects. First, click on the Building Project button. A new window will open with General Project Information at the top and Material Quantities at the bottom. Let's start looking at the General Project Information. You can enter the project name, the building use type, approximate construction start date, project address, and you can import your own project image. Building use type is also where you define the square footage area for your building. If you click on the green icon for editing the building use type, a new pop-up window will appear. Here you can set up the floor area above grade and floor area below grade. You can enter in number with square feet or square meters. The building use type starts with the Other category, but if you click on this Other field, you will get a drop-down menu where you can select from predefined building use types. For example, we can select the educational use, and we can assign 10,000 square feet of floor area to the educational use type. We can add other building use types by clicking on the plus button. For example, we can get some office space to this project. Once we are done assigning building use types, we click on the Done button. Now we see that the building use types is selected as mixed use, since we have educational and office use in this project. The approximate construction start date and the project address are helpful when searching for materials that are valid after a certain date and they're available within certain radius of your project. For example, if we select Seattle, Washington, look for products that are within a certain range of that location. As an example, we have a search for reinforcement bars, and you can see that the valid after date here at the bottom of the screen is set at the project construction start date. By selecting the max distance from project site at 500 miles, we also see that search chip here at the bottom. Once we click the search button, we only get products that are fitting the search criteria that we have defined and that are related to our project. You can upload your own project image as a JPEG file, or if you have imported your project information from BIM 360, this field would show the BIM 360 3D model. Now that we've entered some basic information about our project, let's save it. Some fields are out there when you save the project. Plus, it's a good practice to save your project periodically. Next, let's look at the Building Classification tab. This is primarily for informational purposes, but can also be used for benchmarking across folios, or for benchmarking of buildings in general. You can select the level of development, the source of data for your quantity estimates, construction project scope, and different structural system specifications. You can also select the scope of your project and of your quantities by selecting the Structural, Foundation, Enclosure, and Interiors checkmark. Next, let's look at the Reference and Comparison tab. You can compare the current project to other projects in your library by typing in the other project's names. For example, I have a project that's called Import Building. If I type in Import, the building name will come up and I can select it. Now I can compare this existing project, to my current project. I can also select different targets. For example, I can compare my current project to the EC3 achievable target, or I can select the percentage reductions from the CLF baseline. You can always edit this percentage reduction number. And you can always select the Carbon Leadership Forum baseline version. In the next step, for Supplier Documents, we provide some sample EPD request letters and sample bid document examples for you to use. next tab shows embodied carbon versus operating carbon comparison. Well, we haven't defined any material quantities, nor have we provided the operational EOI for this project yet. So we'll skip this for now, and I'll come back to it later in one of my example buildings. In the Import from EC3 Building Project tab, you can import from other EC3 building projects. This is specifically useful for merging models that are brought into EC3 as separate projects. And for this to appear, I first need to save my project again. Once I save, I can type in the name of the project that I would like to merge into my current project. Again, as an example, I'll search for my import building. Once the building shows up in the search, I can select it and click on the import button. Once my building imports successfully, you can refresh the page and you will see the imported elements in your current model, in your current project. Below the import from EC3 building project, we have the summary section where you can see the gross floor area above grade, floor area below grade, number of stories, height, and the overall weight of the building. You can also see the summary embodied carbon for the entire building, although in this case it's all empty because I don't have any materials and elements defined yet, so we will come back to this section later. Finally, we get to the material quantity input section of the page. We can view this page in multiple formats. We can use the unit format, master format, or a custom format, viewing the categorization of different systems and subsystems and where the elements are categorized. You provide this starting template as a starting point for you, which shows some of the main systems and subsystems, such as the substructure, foundations, basement construction, shell superstructure, etc. You can always reorganize these systems and subsystems by clicking on the Reorganize this View button. And you can move around the systems as well as elements once you define them. Now let's create our first element. You can click on the Add Element button. And you will get a new row for a new element. You can change the name of the building element. So for example, steel. You can adjust the quantity, and this can be either a value or an equation. So I can also type in, for example, M6, and click enter. And then I need to define the unit, so in this case I will use tons. I can also provide notes for documenting my quantity calculations, or for providing information about placeholder EPDs that I'm documenting. Next, we can search for product-specific EPDs by clicking on the search button. You can assign an EPD to your element by clicking on the search button. It will bring up a new pop-up window that looks just like the Find and Compare Materials interface. You can first select the category of materials that you want to search for example, rebar in this case. Search for the EPDs fitting your performance criteria, and then scrolling down to the product EPDs. You can select an EPD either by clicking on the row. It will then be highlighted in green and will show up at the top as selected material. You can also select the material by clicking on the S button on the right next to that EPD. You can again see that the selected material now shows up at the top of the screen. Once you're satisfied with your selection, you can scroll back up to the top and you will see the comparison to your overall search. And you can confirm this selection by clicking on the Use This Selection button at the top right. You will now see that the selection criteria shows up in the collection search box right here. And you can toggle to see your selected material EPD by clicking on the toggle for selected material. You can see the material that we selected in this field. You can now see that the global warming potential values on the right side of the row updated to reflect the selected EPD value. You can look at different types of values of global warming potential by clicking on the Realized button. You will see a drop-down menu of different types of values that you can show. You have the Realized value, which is the selected product-specific EPD value with uncertainty. You have the baseline, which is the CLF baseline value related to the collection search. You have the average value, which is the global warming potential value reported on the PDF version of an EPD. And we have the conservative and achievable values for the search criteria that you have specified. We also have the target value set in the reference and comparison section. And you can also look at the weight of elements instead of the global warming potential values. Note that the values in this field use engineering notation. For example, here you can see a lowercase k, which depicts 1,000 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. Let's look at copying and deleting element searches and elements themselves. Let's add a few additional elements here. And let's say we have the exact same type of material and we just want to copy our existing material search. Let's copy this reinforcing steel search collection by clicking on the copy icon. You will now see the clipboard icons in the elements underneath, and by clicking on the clipboard you will paste in the search collection for that material and the product-specific EPD selection for that material. Again, you can see that the field now populated with the exact same information as in our first element. You can delete the search collections and the product-specific EPD assignments by clicking on the trash can icon. And you can delete entire elements by clicking on the X button on the right side of the row. You can also create multi-material elements, for example for concrete slab on metal deck, which has multiple materials such as concrete, steel deck, and reinforcing. I'll show an example of multi-material elements in an example project that I already defined. We are now looking at an example residential mid-rise project that has all of the material quantities already defined. Let's scroll back down to the quantity input section, and you will see that I have already input quantities for piles, slab on grade, columns, curtain walls, metal studs, membranes, etc. Let's take a look at some of these multi-material elements, for example slab on deck. In this case we have one piece of slab on deck, and we have reinforcing, concrete, and the deck. And you can see that the quantities reflect the actual quantities for the entire piece of slab on deck. You can also look at another example of a multi-material element in this suspended slab. Again, we have concrete, reinforcing, and deck, but in this case we defined the square footage of the slab, and then we defined the amount of material per square foot for concrete, reinforcing, and deck. Now you can see that the slab area multiplies by the unit value for that particular material and calculates the total for the entire multi-material element. You can add additional layers to multi-material elements by clicking on the Add Additional Material button. And you can delete them again by clicking on the X icon on the right side of the screen. Now that we have an example building with all the material quantities defined and all EPD searches and product-specific EPDs assigned, let's look at some of the examples of results graphs and results sheets. Scroll back to the top of the quantity estimate section and click on the Show Summary Charts button. It will prompt you to first save the project, so we will do that. Once you save the project, we can view summary charts for the project by clicking on the Show Summary Charts button. You can look at results diagrams by the different types of views and look at either Sankey diagrams, tree map diagrams, or bar charts. Let's take an example look at global warming potential Sankey diagram, where you will see all of the material types on the left, different system and subsystems in the middle, and the total results on the right side. If you have questions about the Sankey diagram, there's an additional explanation in the top right corner under the tour. If you click on the Sankey diagram, you will get an explanation of what you're looking at. Now let's take a look at another chart. Let's look at the global warming potential tree map, which shows you the contribution by different systems of the building. You can toggle between the realized values, conservative values, or achievable values for this chart. Another useful chart is the lead bar chart, which you can find on the right side of this pop-up. And you will see that it shows only the categories required for the LEED pilot credit for reduced embodied carbon. You also see the CLF baseline values highlighted in purple for that particular material category. You will see the achievable values related to your product search, and you will see the realized values based on your product-specific EPD selection or industry EPD selection. You can also download reports in Excel files or CSV files for the entire project. You can download them as quantity summary reports, building element reports, or lead reports. Let's take a look at an example lead report. As an example, we are looking at an exported lead report. It shows you all of the material elements, as well as the baseline, achievable, and realized values for the project. If you scroll to the right, you will also see the selected EPDs and the links to the product EPD pages in EC3. Now that the whole project is finished, we can share it with our team members or our clients by clicking on the Share button at the top of the project. Right now you can see that the project is private. You can share directly with other people by typing in the other person's name. For example, I can share with my other EC3 accounts by typing in my first name, waiting for the list of names to pop up. I can select one of my other accounts and then click Add. Now my other account will show up in the Who Has Access section of this pop-up window. I can change the access permissions with that particular person by clicking on the drop-down menu. I can always remove that person by clicking on the X button. You can also share with groups. So if you have a company employee group, you can share with that entire group, and everyone in the group will have access to your project. You can also anonymize and publish your particular project by clicking on the Anonymize and Publish button. You can publish as is, or you can anonymize it first and then publish. If you click Anonymize, EC3 will generate a random project name and overwrite the current project name. It will slightly alter the project location and all of the material quantities and material selections in the building, but not in any substantial way that it would skew the actual results. It will just make it harder for anyone to identify the exact project that you are sharing. Once you share the project with other people using EC3, they will be able to find the shared projects in the Plan and Compare Buildings section under Shared with Me tab. I previously shared one building with myself called BCA Residential Building Template, and you can see it here. You can also organize and reorganize your projects in the My Buildings tab by either creating folders or superfolders for your projects. These work similarly as folders and subfolders in your regular browser. Let's create a superfolder for this project called Superfolder. And a subfolder called Folder. Now I can drag these folders or projects as I like to reorganize these views. I can drag my building projects to drop them in the folder that I just created. You can toggle the folder open or closed by clicking on the arrow. You can also compare multiple buildings by clicking on the checkbox. And if you select multiple buildings, a new button called Compare Buildings will show up on the right side. If you click on that Compare Buildings button, a summary chart will show up with comparing the global warming potential values across all of the selected buildings. In this case, our new building that we just created didn't have any materials assigned to it, and so we see that it has no embodied carbon. So we see 100% difference in the two projects. You can also change the views by clicking on the View by Category button. And you can now see the types of materials that are used within each of these buildings. You can copy existing buildings by clicking on the copy icon on the right side of the screen. This may take a few minutes, and once completed, it will provide you with a link to the copied building, which you can now edit. Once your building finishes copying, it will show a link to your new copied building, and it will also show up in your list of buildings as a copy. We provide some template building projects for you in the Templates tab. And there are also some examples of existing buildings in the Public tab. The residential mid-rise example building that we just worked with is also in this Public list. You can copy this building and also explore some of the publicly available buildings in the Public list. For example, you can see the BT residential mid-rise example that we went over in this exercise. There are additional buildings that you can explore, and you can look at the results charts for these different types of buildings just as we did for the example.